can sit there for much.
Yeah, front seat. My seat? Yeah, this is
So-
That's it behind you.
This was this was made for me at a Playboy magazine party. So I got to keep it, but he's never hired me again. But I got to keep this for occasions like this. The gift that lasts forever.
It's simple, but
Well, I think the party planner guy, who was also, you heard misunderstood.
I'm gonna start
You heard
introducing
Dragster misunderstood? That's the guy who also gives parties.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Psychic Salon in Caravan of Dreams, co-sponsored by Esper Guides and Psychics on NYC. We are here with Angel Millar, our guest speaker. We also have great psychics here. We have Kyla James, we have Laurie with the story, we have Tamara from Socialites. You know, afterward they're going to be around for readings. I also encourage you to get something to eat at Caravan of Dreams. They have a great vegan menu. So great fruit juices, everything. So anyway, without further ado, Angel, he's a practitioner of esotericism for more than 3 decades. He's the author of Path of the Warrior Mystic, Being a Man in the Age of Chaos, which I think right now is really important. And 3 stages of initiatic spirituality: craftsman, warrior, magician. He's practiced a number of different magical paths, including chaos magic. And his latest book is The Man Initiate in the Supernatural Woman, which he's going to talk about today. Really excited to hear your talk. Honored to have you.
Absolutely appreciate it. Yeah, so my upcoming book, which is out in May, is Supernatural Woman and the Male Initiate Bonded Through Dreams. And I'm going to talk about the phenomenon of the appearance of a supernatural woman throughout history and literature and mythology. And I was originally going to show some images, but unfortunately we can't rig up my laptop. So we have to skip some of the tarot and go more to the mythology and the magic. So I hope that's okay. I'm going to begin with a quote from Christopher Hyatt and Lon Milo Duquette. Many of you probably know Lon Milo Duquette for his work with Thelema and Aleister Crowley's magical sister. And he says in his book, Sex Magic, Tantra and Tarot, the Way of the Secret Lover, he says, quote, "Each of us has a secret lover, a lover who awaits just behind the erotic images that flood our minds during sexual arousal or in sleep, a dream lover who distinguishes herself as the individuals with whom we fall in love." So behind all of our erotic fantasies and appearing in our dreams, there is this dream lover, which is for him the holy guardian angel, this sort of being of light that represents our higher or highest consciousness, that can reveal some sort of revelation to us about the meaning of life. I think this is, in a sense, kind of captures something that's very ancient, but it's not exactly how ancient people saw it. There was in antiquity, and even through the medieval period, this strange phenomenon of this supernatural woman, a fairy or something like this, that would appear to men and would transform them in some way. Often they would appear at the moment of death or just before death as a kind of warning, or to draw the man across the threshold of life into the world beyond. But very often they were associated with literature and poetry and inspiration and oracular speech, and of course with dreams as well. And maybe I'll just say a little bit about why I became interested in this. So originally I was writing a different book, and I started writing a little bit about this, and it expanded, but at the same time my own experience of the supernatural, of the spiritual. So it took me in a very different direction. And I've been initiated into various different traditions, and actually every time by men, and women were not really a part of it. And I think this was, although it's a sort of politically incorrect thing today, It's a very traditional for men to initiate men going back thousands of years, and I think it's important, and I think it's especially important in this day and age when men don't know how to be men, they don't know how to act, they're criticized for everything, and are not given any sort of healthy role models of how to behave in the world. And but I think at a certain point, you have to ask yourself, what is initiation into manhood or into the quote-unquote Männerbund, these male initiatic societies? What are they for? And I think, historically speaking, they're either for going to war or integrating into society, which means, essentially getting married. Doesn't matter what culture you're in. So it's either the aim is, in a sense, war and death, or some lifelong experience with a woman. And maybe in a certain sense, this is also reflected in our dreams and in our experiences and in our own sort of spiritual revelations. But if one is initiated into a Männerbund, there is something beyond that. And one possibility is the appearance of this supernatural being. Now, the supernatural woman appears in lots of different traditions. In Zoroastrianism, she is the Dana, who appears on this bridge between life and death and judges the character of the person, whether male or female. And if the person that has died and is on this bridge is of a good character, she will lead them to the heavens. And if they are of a bad character, she will lead them to damnation, which I suppose means something like pushing them off the bridge. But we also see it in medieval English literature with the fairy in particular, which I'm going to talk more about. And in Norse mythology with the Fylgja, I've heard it also pronounced Folga, but this is a language that was spoken around 1,000 years ago. So I'm going to say it's Fylgja, Fylgja in the singular and Fylgja in the plural. And like the Dana of Zoroastrianism, the Fylgja, this supernatural female being, can appear close to death or at death, but also appears in dreams. It is, I think, associated also with sort of visions and even with wisdom and poetry to a certain extent. And it might be interesting to point out that in Norse mythology, or in the Norse way of thinking, men had a Fylgja, this supernatural female, but women, I believe, did not have a supernatural man. Now, why that might be, I'm not sure, but that seems to be the case. Although there are related terms such as dromkona, which means dream woman, and there is a male version of that, drom method, meaning dream man. And dreams are important to Norse and as well as to other ancient cultures. This is where we have these visions of the gods or visions of these supernatural beings, or it's the realm where they can come and visit us and intrude into our world to some degree. And there's another interesting word that might be worth knowing, that is dromstoli, which was the Norse word meaning dream stolen, which was a kind of sickness, that if you didn't dream, there was something actually a bit wrong with you. It was not a desirable thing. But people were supposed to dream. And I think that we live in a time that people are not dreaming, which is a kind of curious thing, and a condition that the Old Norse peoples, or Old Norse speaking peoples, to be more technically correct, would say is actually a time of a kind of spiritual sickness.
Quick question. Do you think that's because of the heavy pot use? No, seriously, because as soon as marijuana does kill the REM.
Well, if it's doing that, then I would cut out the pot, to be honest. But I think there's lots of reasons for it. And one, it might be the frenetic pace of modern life as well, and being bombarded with images that's just too many to digest. And I think, contemporary people have a real problem in relaxing. We think we're relaxing, but because we sit on the couch and eat Cheetos, but that's not really relaxing. I studied hypnotism, which used to be a big part of magic before Eastern meditation was really introduced into magic. And if you practice hypnotism or self-hypnotism, you realize how relaxed you can get. And personally, I don't do this every day, but when I do mantra, I do self-hypnosis with it, and not infrequently I will enter into some kind of dream state. And when I do that, maybe it's the combination of the mantra and focusing on sacred imagery and sounds, that when I do that, I very often, if not always, will experience dreams of castles or nature and this kind of thing. Not necessarily of deities, but things that seem to be pre-modern. But yeah, so dreaming. So speaking of the Fylgja, this ancient Norse concept of this supernatural woman that appears to men, the historian John L. Greenway says, as it is described in medieval Icelandic sagas and from folklore evidence, the Fylgja, does not exist on a fundamentally different plane of reality from that of its human counterpart. Although it is to the modern reader, and in typical medieval narrative, a symbolic representation of the quality of the character, there is little awareness in the sagas that the forms covered by the term Fylgja are symbolic. The Fylgja, plural, are sometimes concrete enough to be tripped over, even when empirically invisible. And so he's saying that the Fylgja, unlike, say, Jung's anima, is a kind of physical being that can exist out in the world, and it's not just some element of the psyche, but nevertheless it is tied to the character, intimately tied to the character, like the Zoroastrian Dana that gets to judge the deceased person, whether male or female, gets to judge their character and lead them to the heavens or to damnation. The Fylgja is attached to a human male, and it reflects his character in some sense. And so, at the same time, because it's not part of the psyche, unlike the Jungian anima, the Fylgja can actually leave that human male, can leave that man, and can actually, if he acts treacherously or seems to have a very low character, or his character is descending, is disloyal, lacks bravery, the Fylgja can get fed up with him, rather like a human woman, and desert him and even attach herself to another man. So it's not dependent on the human. It's not part of the psyche, although it somehow reflects the psyche as well. Well, we've been speaking about dreams, and I just wanted to read a paragraph from Israel Regardie, which is a little bit Kabbalistic. And I'm not an expert on Kabbalah, but I've interpolated what each Kabbalistic phrase means. So it's pretty simple, but he talks about dreaming. But Regardie, who was of course known for reviving the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn during the 20th century, was once Aleister Crowley's secretary. He says, quote, Yesod Foundation, the seat of automatic consciousness, or the home of the Freudian unconscious, can be seen as a place where the majority of mankind lives. From this point of view, Freud's reasoning is valid, but only as far as Yesod Foundation, or ordinary consciousness. If the occult aspirant is capable of moving along the path of Samek, he may reach the plane of Tiferet, beauty, glory, etc., where the dream content would not be full of lurid symbolism. So he's saying, I think rather like ancient peoples, that okay, you can dream of all this lurid Freudian stuff, or this stuff of the daily world, whatever it may be, but at some point, in some way, you can transcend that, and then you're away from this lurid symbolism, and something else invades it, which if ancient people would say is something like the Fylgja, or at least it would open up the consciousness to that kind of experience of dreaming of these beings. He goes on to say, although not specifically related to dreams, I think he makes an interesting point. He says, of all the problems confronting the earnest student of mysticism, That is one who entertains the aspiration and cherishes the ideal dearly beyond all other of divine union, the most discerning and glib and often hostile reiteration by the psychological amateur and professional alike that mysticism simply has its origins in the Oedipus complex, unquote. And so the phrase that kind of interests me is this divine union, but also the Oedipus complex, as if mysticism is somehow some kind of trying to dissolve oneself in this sort of mother figure or mother goddess figure. And I can certainly say that as a 17-year-old that was involved in neo-paganism in Kent, in England, I think that would actually be quite a valid criticism, that there was something kind of Oedipal, there was something kind of weirdly sexual about it. I was 17, but the guy who was running the sort of pagan group that I was in, but seemed to be overly friendly with women. There was something a little bit crossing the line, which I've heard many stories about since then, but about spiritual masters who do this kind of thing. But leaving that aside, there's this idea in magic today of non-duality and of dissolving ourselves and getting rid of the ego, and we experience this non-dual bliss of oneness. And I think this phenomenon of the Philgia or the fairy or whatever, or the nymph in ancient Greece, is completely contrary to that. It's not this idea that you dissolve in it and you reach this enlightened state where your ego is gone and there's non-being. I think almost quite the contrary, and especially in Norse culture, you had boasting was almost kind of was okay, and challenging other people and doing heroic deeds and being, in a sense, quite egoic actions. You wanted to slay the dragon or be the victor in battle, and this was seen as pretty good. And I'm sure that was the case in most ancient cultures, including the ancient Greece. But at the same time, you have this supernatural woman that can appear to you, and it's definitely not about dissolving oneself, but it's some other kind of thing that makes you maybe even go out into the world to conquer it. Now, one of the ways of experiencing this supernatural being, perhaps, is, as mentioned, through dreams, but also through ecstasy, some kind of trance state, or what chaos magicians would call gnosis. In Peter Carroll's Liber Null, for example, he talks about two different methods, the inhibitory and the excitatory methods, where, excitatory would be, say, something like voodoo, where you're dancing and working yourself up into an ecstatic state where the deity takes over you and you can't even experience it because it's possessed you. And then the inhibitory would be something like sleep or fasting or meditation or hypnosis, where you can go into some kind of hypnotic trance or ecstatic state. Although it's slightly tangential, Peter Carroll's book Psychonaut, which is maybe the best known chaos magic book, the term psychonaut actually comes from Ernst Jünger, who was a member of the revolutionary conservatives in Germany, which seemed to be very, very right-wing at the beginning of the 20th century, or a little bit after the First World War. But at the same time, Ernst Jünger was also a huge experimenter with drugs, and wrote diaries about experimenting with all kinds of drugs, everything from alcohol to hallucinogens, and this sort of bucks this trend. But he makes a very interesting comment. He says, quote, "A disposition to ecstasy can become so pronounced that the mere patterns of behavior suffice and substances are superfluous. This is mainly the domain of ascetics. Their intimate relation with ecstasy has always been known. In addition to abstinence, vigils, and fasting, there is also solitude, from which artists and sages have also always drawn their strength," unquote. So for him, this sort of ecstatic state or solitude or some kind of altered state of consciousness is related to sages and artists, which is certainly the case historically, mythologically, going back into antiquity. And his use of the term solitude is perhaps particularly interesting in regard to this supernatural woman, in that in ancient Greece, there was a type of figure called a nympholept, which was a man who would be in a kind of sexual relationship with a supernatural being, the nymph. So he would, in a sense, be married to the nymph. But very often, nympholepts lived out in solitude, often in or around mountains or caves. So almost like a hermit or a monk, as we might think of it, but they were married to this supernatural female being. I believe there is a female equivalent where they would be married to a satyr as well. So I was talking about non-duality. So I'm going to talk about duality a little bit now. So in regard to our, what Freud or Israel Regardie or might regard as a lurid Freudian symbolism, it might be pointed out, for example, that in women's romantic literature you get two types of hero, and one is very much integrated into the world. He's a billionaire, a doctor, a lawyer, someone who's very respectable. But then there's another sort of genre of female romantic literature that is about the vampire or the werewolf or even the warlock, which is very much, again, not against society, but outside of society, almost sort of non-human, but at the same time supernatural. And looking at Jungian psychology in regard to the anima, Carl Jung's wife Emma Jung wrote quite extensively on the anima and the animus. And she makes this really curious comment. She says at one point that the anima leads the man towards consciousness and towards more and more consciousness, to be more and more aware, I suppose. But she says at one point, almost like a slip of the tongue, that there's this other anima, and she can't explain why, she says, that leads the man away from consciousness, but they don't know why, and they're focusing on the other one that leads it towards consciousness. And I think it might have been, might have brought forth some interesting, something quite fruitful had they have focused on this idea of the anima that leads away from consciousness. And I think the thing about the Jungian anima is that it is this thing that integrates people into society to make them the doctor or the lawyer, but this other thing that they can't quite recognize that leads away from that, which I would say is some kind of intuition of the supernatural woman. And Emma Jung's writings is, although it's technically psychology, it's more occult than I think almost any occult book you could get your hand on, with references to Valkyries and Odin and this kind of thing. It's pretty extraordinary stuff. Freud too, of course, spoke about this sort of duality of the life instinct and the death instinct, which he thought was sort of ingrained on a cellular level, that it was something in us biologically. And again, you do find this duality even in relation to the fylgja. There's a medieval Icelandic saga called Gisli Surson's saga, and I'm just going to read a little bit from that. Gisli was a man who had these dreams of these two dream women, or Dronkana, one of which is clearly his fylgja, or the supernatural woman that will appear to him at death. But there's this other dream woman that torments him. And so he awakes one day and recalls, there are two women I dream of. One is good to me. The other always tells me something that makes matters worse than ever. And she only prophesies ill for me. Just now I dreamed that I appeared to be walking toward a certain house or hall, and it seemed that I walked into the house and recognized there were many of my kinsmen and friends. They sat by fires and drank, and there were 7 fires, some of them almost burned out, and some of them burning very bright. Then my good dream woman, the good Dron Connor, came in and said that this signified how many years I had left to live, and she advised me to stop following the old pre-Christian faith for the rest of my life and to refrain from studying any charms or ancient lore. And she told me to be kind to the deaf and to the lame and to the poor and the helpless. And that is when my dream ended. So there's this dream woman who's his Filgia that will appear at the end of life, and she shows him this house, and there are 7 fires signifying the 7 years he has left. And then again, the same saga says, one night Gisli dreamed again that the good dream woman came to him. She was riding a grey horse, and she invited him to come home with her, to which he agreed. They arrived at a house, which was more like a great hall, and she led him inside. He saw cushions on the raised benches, and the whole place was beautifully decorated. She told him they would stay there and take their pleasure. And this is where you will come when you die, she said, and enjoy wealth and great happiness. And even more explicitly, there's a canon in here called Hild of the Rings, which means dream woman. Again, it says, here, she says to him, here will you lie down and breathe your last with me, said Hild of the Rings. And here, my warrior, you will rule over all this wealth and have dominion over me, and we will have riches beyond gold's measure. So this having dominion over her in this house and having all this wealth, I mean, the dominion part seems to be saying that there's some kind of sexual relationship between this Filgia and Gisli, this medieval Icelandic figure. So I was going to just wrap up with a couple of other stories. Well, one medieval English story and one myth from the ancient Norse. And the first is the wife of Bath, where we see this supernatural woman appearing in the form of a fairy, and it's the inverse of another legend that was written around the same time. So this is the end of the 14th century, or close to the end of the 14th century. Geoffrey Chaucer, England's probably best known author other than Shakespeare. And in his story of the wife of Bath, I can recount it without looking. So it's about this knight. I'm going to put this tactfully. The knight imposes himself on a woman against her will and is subsequently dragged to court to be judged by King Arthur and his knights. They find him guilty of this crime and say he has to be beheaded. The women of the court, including Guinevere, plead for mercy and say, don't kill him. Let's send him out for a year to discover what women really want. So he is sent away by Guinevere and the women of the court, and he travels around the land and gets all kinds of different answers as to what women want. Some say that women want expensive clothing. Some say that women want their husbands to die so that they can remarry. And after a while, he's completely confused about what women want. And it's getting to the end of the year, and he realizes he has to turn back, and then he'll have to go back to the castle where he will be beheaded because he hasn't figured out, or hasn't learned what women really want. And as he turns back, he sees these sort of beautiful women dancing around the edge of a forest. And at the beginning, or the prologue to the story, we're told that this is a time when fairies existed before they sort of disappeared, converting to Christianity. And it's sort of implied that these incredibly beautiful women dancing around by the edge of a forest, all very strangely, are in fact fairies. So he, being the kind of figure he is, of course, and also wanting to save his head, he goes towards the women, but they vanish in thin air. And sitting there is just this extremely ugly old woman, an old hag, the ugliest thing he's ever seen in his entire life. But desperate at this point, he speaks to her, tells her his dilemma, and she says, fine, I'll tell you what women really want. if you promise to give me whatever I ask for. And he says, this is a great deal, let's go back to King Arthur's court. So they go there, and the women of the court and Guinevere assemble. Guinevere is presiding, and the old hag has told this degenerate knight what women really want. And he tells the ladies assembled, women want to have dominion over their husband. And all the ladies applaud, and it's wonderful, and they say, great, you got it. And then the old hag says, he promised to give me whatever I asked for, I want to marry him. And then the knight says, I'll give you anything else other than that. She said, that's what I want, so they're married. And he's sulking and doesn't want to go to bed, and she's taunting him, saying, why are you so upset, my love? We're married, this is wonderful, come to bed. And he doesn't want to go, and eventually he does. I don't think they're getting freaky or anything, but anyway, he goes back to her, and then after a few days he can stand it no more, and he berates her and demeans her and belittles her. This is not a nice character, of course, clearly. And then she lectures him. This isn't the way of Jesus, you're a Christian. You say you're an aristocrat, you're just proud because you were born into money. But being a real aristocrat is your character. And she puts him straight. And after a while of this, he says, you are right. And she says at this point, I'll tell you what, I'll give you a choice. Either I can remain as this ugly old hag, and you will know that I'll be faithful to you forever. It's not like she has a lot of choices out there. And then, or she says, or I can transform myself into a beautiful woman, but you'll have to live with the possibility that I might not be faithful to you. And at this point, he's so beaten down by her arguments and realizes what a terrible person he is being. And he says, I can't decide. You choose. And then she says, of course, are you saying that I have dominion over you? And he says, of course, yes. And this, of course, is what all women want. And then she's so thrilled by this. She transforms herself into a beautiful woman and says, but I'll be faithful to you anyway. And then they embrace, and it's very beautiful. Now, of course, who is this weird woman that looks like an old hag that transforms herself into this beautiful woman? Somehow tied to his character, has transformed him, and then transforms herself. Is, of course, she is a fairy. I say this just to give an alternative opinion, but I did read one academic that says she must be a succubus, but that is completely stupid, because they are legally married, which is a sacrament in Catholicism, and of course they would embrace. This is perfectly normal, perfectly legal, and nothing. And she's just converted into Christianity in a proper sense. So hardly the sort of behavior of a succubus. But there she is. Again, there's this supernatural woman tied to this man's character, like the Fylgja. The Fylgja somehow represents or reflects the man's character and can leave him if he's horrible. And again, hundreds of years into the medieval period, in England, and we see this same thing, this fairy that transforms the man almost in an initiatic sense, and then reveals that she's this supernatural being, although one that has converted to Christianity. Now, just to talk about how this is an inversion of another myth, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. In that myth, very briefly, a mysterious green knight turns up at King Arthur's court one Christmas and challenges the men present to chop his head off. No one wants to do it, but Sir Gawain finally gets up, takes the Green Knight's axe and chops his head off. The Green Knight picks up his head and then says, that means you have to come and find me in a year from now, and then I'm going to do the same thing to you. And then he gets on his horse and rides off, and Sir Gawain leaves and goes to find this mysterious Green Knight. So already there's an inversion, right? So in The Wife of Bath, he wants to save his head, and his whole intention is to not be beheaded. But in the Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, he actively goes out to seek his fate, which is to be beheaded. Also, the women in the Knight of Bath, of course, tell the man to go on, to go and travel and discover Whereas in Seguin and the Green Knight, the women tell him, don't go, it's, you know, you're going to be killed. So there's already this inversion. He goes, finds a castle, a woman tries to seduce him, but he resists, she's the queen. He resists instead of imposing himself on her. And then he goes to find the Green Knight, and who almost beheads him but lets him off. And it turns out that behind the Green Knight is actually another fairy called Morgan Le Fay. She is the queen of the fairies. She knows the magic of Merlin, and she is actually the woman in the castle that tried to seduce him, but she had transformed herself into this queen figure. Now, let's wrap up with the Bolverker myth, which I think, for me, represents something very ancient, but encapsulates a lot of what is going on. You may know this from Norse mythology. The god Odin goes to this mountain where he lays with a giantess called Gunlof for 3 nights and takes the poetic mead. Now, there's a lot more to it there, and I'll just briefly touch upon the different points that are valid. Years or a long time before this episode, there is a war of the gods between the Asa gods and the Vanir gods. And this war is started by the murder of a witch called Golvik, which means something like gold drunk or gold intoxicated. To seal their truce, the gods spit into a vat, and then the spit is brought to life into a being called Kvasa, who is the wisest of all beings. He travels around the world dispensing wisdom, but is eventually murdered by 2 dwarfs, Fiala and Gala, and they drain his blood into 3 vessels, a large vessel like a kettle, and then 2 cups, or 2 large cups. And his blood becomes the poetic mead, that if you drink it, you will be transformed into a poet, read something more like a magician. The 2 dwarves also kill a giant and his wife, the brother of Borgi and his wife, and he gets revenge, or wants to get revenge on them, but they surrender the mead to him, and then it's taken to a mountain and put in the mountain. Or the dwarves kill, Gilling and his wife, and then it's taken to the mountain. So eventually Odin wants to get hold of this magical mead, and it's taken to the mountain by Borgi, and he burrows into the mountain and stays with this giantess for 3 nights, which implies some kind of sexual relationship between the 2. And then she gives him, while he's sitting on a golden stool, which seems to reflect this detail of this witch called Golvik, gold drunk, being murdered prior to this. She gives him on a golden stool a drink of the magical mead, or the poetic mead, and then he transforms into an eagle and flies away. There might be some things that tie this to ancient Greek mythology, and probably some other Indo-European source that influenced both of them, or they both derive from. It's notable that in Greek, the word crater means either a mixing bowl where you mix wine, or a volcano. And this flying out of a mountain does seem to imply of some kind of volcano, some kind of crater. But we also have this 3 vessels, the crater in which the mead is poured, and then these other 2 cups, which might imply, or 2 other vessels, which might imply that it was for 2 people or 2 lovers, not just 2 dwarves. According to Plato, souls are mixed in a crater. We don't know if that meant a volcano or a mixing bowl, but there's some kind of archetypal, or better said, some kind of primal or ancient Indo-European motif here. I think that this ecstatic drink that transforms people into poets and magicians is mixed in this bowl, but it is also related to this appearance of some kind of supernatural woman, or maybe some kind of priestess or something like that. But to sum up, so you can see for all these different myths and legends, all the way from ancient Greece with the nympholeptus uniting with nymphs in caves or mountains, through Norse mythology with Odin and Gunlof, or medieval Icelandic literature with Gisli, who sees these visions or has dreams of his Fylgja, who will take him to this house after he dies, or medieval English literature where this fairy transforms this knight. This figure is always associated with character, transforming the character, often with inspiration as well, and sometimes with literature and poetry as well, so hence the poetic maid. And I think the question, is it the holy guardian angel of L'Homme Duquette? Is it the anima of Jung? Is it somehow tied to the life instinct and death instinct of Freud? And I think ultimately it's beyond that, and maybe it's something, it might be in our dreams, but I think it's something that's even beyond all of this and beyond the human. So thanks very much.
Just to open up to questions. Anyone have any questions for? I actually have a question.
Okay.
What is the difference between a succubus and a supernatural woman?
Yeah, well, so a succubus in medieval Christianity is a female spirit that draws the life force out of men, and there's an incubus as well that would do the same with women. So it's an entirely negative experience, that this is a kind of demonic being that drains the individual. So yeah. Whereas this supernatural being or supernatural woman that you find in Norse literature or in ancient Greece, so with the nymph or the fairy, it's doing something positive. Even with Chaucer's wife of Bath, the fairy transforms this degenerate knight into a person of character, and then transforms herself, or maybe him transforming his character is what transforms her. But ultimately, these are figures of inspiration and not draining, and not taking people off to some kind of dark side.
A quick question. Are there times when a succubus, though, could be used in a positive way to generate, good results if you develop that relationship with them?
Well, I would say no, because I mean, you could question: is the succubus actually some sort of religious paranoia about these beings, and is it wrongly interpreted, or is it a real being that really does drain the sort of life force of a human being? But if we take it at face value that it is that, then I would say no, it's probably not a good idea to be in a relationship with a succubus. Whether it's a good thing to be in a relationship with some other kind of supernatural woman, that's a different question. But I think if you are getting positive things from it and it's not draining you, it's probably not a succubus. But of course, one would have to evaluate that on a case-to-case basis. And,
So these magical women, they only appear to men, because I've had visions and dreams of magical goddesses and women coming and just revealing certain messages and things.
Sure.
So.
Yeah, so I think there is this phenomenon of this supernatural woman that only appears to men, at least certainly with nymphs and nympholettes, and then with the Fylgja, which only, from what we know, only men had this, and it was a woman, and women didn't have it. We might debate whether that's really true, or they were missing something, or why should it be? But of course, at the same time, a woman can have dreams of supernatural women or goddesses, and men can have dreams of gods and supernatural men. But I think it's a sort of a specific classification, and I think the difference, not that some other being couldn't do this, but I think from what I've seen, this slightly sexual relationship with this supernatural being is associated with literature, poetry, inspiration, and sometimes with death and crossing over to the other world. And there are interestingly, examples, even in Christianity, of this kind of thing, and with women as well. And even dreams of gods, or in Christianity of Jesus, well documented and transformed people's lives. I don't know if you know the rapper MIA. So she had a dream of Jesus and it completely transformed her life. So that would be a very modern example. And she seems to be sincere because she's lost so many fans because of it. So, it was a real thing for her. But there's I think it's a 12th century, maybe 13th century female Christian mystic called Marguerite Kemp, who had, let's say, visions of Jesus that were subtly erotic. So Jesus appeared and said, I want to lay in your bed with you like your husband, and whatever you do to me on earth will be done in heaven, and this kind of thing. And, and even there, it's interesting that she is the first person, not to write, but to sort of relate her autobiography. So it's the first autobiography in the English language, although she had to recite it because she was illiterate, but it is the first one. So even there's this weird sort of connection between writing and poetry and literature and this being that appears. So even in ancient Greece with the nympholet, it would inspire oracular speech and poetry. So even in Plato's Phaedrus, at one point Socrates makes this weird comment saying, "Oh, my speech is so much more, eloquent, that you've exposed me to this nymph that's around here." So it's kind of curious. But of course you can dream of these beings. One might even say that these beings appear, but I think this is some weird particular class of being. Yeah.
I have a couple of comments.
Yeah.
If you want to explore that, there's a woman called Ida Craddock. Are you familiar with
I've heard her name, but I don't know her work.
She's very intelligent, extremely well learned, and she had a relationship with an angel for many, many years. She wrote around 1890.
Oh, okay.
Okay. She was put in prison because she wrote a sex manual.
Yeah, I
for
know who
couples.
she is. Yeah.
But Ida is one of the clearest and most intelligent people you'll ever come about. Okay, if you want to explore that whole thing about sex with spirits or...
Yeah, well, I've been doing that, but I mean, she's certainly not the only one. I mean, even...
Well, she's super clear, much more than Aleister Crowley. There's no
Yeah.
crazy stuff around it.
Yeah.
Also,
Yeah.
in the cards in the playing deck, okay, you have two male cards and one female card.
In the playing deck?
In a card deck,
Okay.
okay? It's the queen that makes the jack king.
Okay.
Those playing cards that evolved into the tarot, or tarot actually evolved into playing cards, they were done by Jewish, Kabbalists, and they were introduced for a reason from esoteric schools. So, the jack is the unconscious man. The queen is conscience, but divine conscience. And she brings that to the jack, who she shows him his true nature, so he can become king, and then she can be the rightful queen. So it's the queen that makes the jack king. Okay? And you also have, in Christianity, the typical marriage ceremony. The bridegroom stands at the head of the altar. The father brings the bride, walks her up the aisle, which is the spinal column. Okay? The bridegroom is Shiva consciousness. The bride is Shakti. If you really want to explore the female gift to a man, it's the Shiva-Shakti relationship through the Kundalini. And that's explored extensively in the Serpent Power, but there's many books in the whole Hindu tradition. And the whole Tantra tradition is the spiritual concept of the female and the male. In the West, you get this magical and fantasies and dreams. I mean, my teacher spent 10 years learning how not to dream, because you want the subconscious to become conscious. You don't want to go into the subconscious. You want the subconscious
Yeah.
to become
Well,
conscious.
so that's interesting, and that's an interpretation. So one thing I try to do in this book is stick to history and actually, history and literature and mythology that we can trace. I don't try to interpret it.
No, if you want the real myth in the West, is Parsifal. That is the real Jack trying to find the Grail. In the meantime, she is in the center of the Fisher Castle, and she doesn't have to do anything because she's in the center of life. The American Indians, commemorate that, and he is out there under her influence, trying to become a real man. And I always found that to be the best example of the male-female, call it venture in life, is the myth of Parsifal.
Okay, well, great, thank you.
Can we intentionally, does the supernatural woman need to contact us, or can someone actually intentionally do a ritual to make contact?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, in regard to the Fylgja, so it might be different in different cultures because the nympholept would be trying to contact the nymph, or at least be doing things to sort of sustain a relationship with the nymph. But in regard to the Fylgja, then I would say no. It's not a supernatural being that rituals are performed to. It's just it's a reflection of one's character, and it appears when it wants to appear. So, yeah.
Angel, we have a few more minutes. Could you touch upon your tarot piece of the presentation, even though you don't have your slides?
Yeah, so I was really just going to introduce it by looking at some different things in contemporary culture with sort of representations of the supernatural woman. But I was going to show some images of like Alexander McQueen's fashion shows and Dior, which has a lot of tarot in it and things like this. But I was going to show the Rider-Waite High Priestess card and Crowley's Lust card. And let me just touch on, so why. So with the High Priestess card, I was talking about the Manabund early on, or the male initiatic society, and Waite, who gave the instructions of what symbolism should be in those cards, although he didn't draw them, of course. But and you're right, the artist does not get enough credit, but the symbolism there is completely Masonic. The two columns, the pomegranates, and she's also not that the Torah is Masonic, but it's not. It's probably in some sense related to Freemasonry, which is very sort of heavily Old Testament. But all of the symbols, like the pomegranates, the pillars, etc. Even I think there's maybe network in it as well. This is all incredibly Masonic, but then you have this female in the center of it, which is a kind of strange choice. But you do find these female images or female beings in Freemasonry as well, representing like faith and hope and charity, etc. But you can see something even more primal in that. In regard to Crowley's Lust card, the thing I find interesting about it is that if you look at the image closely, the female who's riding this beast with many heads has no face herself, and it's almost like maybe is a kind of cultural comment that we've effaced this supernatural being, or maybe on a personal level there is this sort of danger of becoming a face by becoming involved in all of this sort of strange occult stuff. Which happens to many people, right? They sort of lose themselves and lose their genius after a while. Not always, but often.
So we have some of the pictures here I can show.
Yeah.
That.
Yeah, I don't know if you can see this, but this is like Alexander McQueen's fashion show from 2007, which is like heavily influenced by the occult, and then Dior is the same, or influenced by tarot. This is Antonella Arismendi. She's a fashion photographer and a photographer for different brands, but she also does this very curious sort of esoteric photography, let's say. And she has her own esoteric practice as well, I know from speaking with her. Oh yeah, and so these three images here, so this is from Charlie XCX's song House. which is not it's not explicitly occult, but when you look at it, there's something very occult about it, and very sort of folkloric about it. This appearance of this strange raven associated with Odin, and she's burning this red candle and this kind of thing. And so, although some of it is very overt in culture, like Alexander McQueen with the pentagram or Dior with tarot cards, some of it I think is more subtle, maybe less conscious, but in a way kind of more interesting sometimes.
You get Rick Owens.
Yeah, Rick Owens, tote bag, $500. So
He's wild.
yeah.
Dior, and then we get the.
Yeah, so this is actually a movie created for Dior, which is showing their clothing, but every character in it is one of the major arcana. So you have the moon, the devil, and so on, magician. So here are two more: the devil and the hangman. It's pretty interesting.
This is from Dior.
Yeah, that's Dior.
I'm gonna edit this into the. Let's see what's going on here. Yeah, then after that we have. Let's see, I don't know why this is. There you go.
Yeah, so there are two tarot cards that I was going to talk about, and then just skipping ahead. So this is from Fraternitas Saturnae, where the female magician is having her energy drawn from her by the male magician. You might think
It's
that's
the
good or
German
bad.
method for
Yeah,
German.
Fraternitas, it's German, exactly. And then here, this is kind of interesting. This is from an alchemical work associated with the Golden Rosy Cross, the Order of the Golden Rosy Cross. And here it says, I unveil her nature for you to follow her, Folga. And this term Folga is related to Old English Folgen and Filgir as well. So this idea of somehow following this sort of being. And then here, following nature. And then this is Odin and Gunlof, and then here Odin is flying away in the form of a eagle.
Cool. That's your new book.
Yes, it is.
Supernatural Woman and the Male Initiate.
Yes.
Under Two Dreams.
Thank you.
Coming out when?
Next month.
Next month.
May 26th.
Excellent. Great. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's wonderful. Cool. So we have our readers here. If anyone wants to get a reading, the best readers in New York City here. So we have, and actually, Kyler usually reads in Washington Square Park, and he's generous enough to come here and join the talk. So it's pretty great. All of them are great. So thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
So let me. Let's see.
Yeah, it is, right?